So I got an email from David yesterday. It was a very nice email, and he was one of the many. He sends lots of emails. So, and he was saying that he suggested as a Dharma talk, working with thought, and in particular my little book here where I talk about the difference in the levels of working with thought, and so there's one thing called seeing through thought, right? And you said that's a little bit complicated, and excuse me. So I thought I would do that today, make a stab at it, and it is beginning with that idea that the different levels of working with thought are really probably parallel to the level of our own where we are in our own state of consciousness. Number one. So I wanted to share with you a little humor. So as we were sitting, I was thinking about talking about thought. And I just loved it. I I thought, it's like, isn't that just perfect? So I'm thinking about talking about thought. So, and it's funny, but it's also astoundingly true. And this is like kind of like getting pretty subtle. The only thing that can work with thought is thought. What can work with thought? We want to say, well, me, right? I won't, but what is that? I mean, the thing that works with thought is thought. And that goes with this, that's partly explaining why in truth it's extraordinarily complicated. I mean, it is really complicated. I mean, maybe I'm act as if, or maybe, it's look, I'm sitting up higher than everybody, right? Well, maybe I'm parallel to Robert, and maybe, but I guess really I would just say, not that it's extraordinarily complicated from the position of standing on a mountain and looking down, as much as it is from saying that that's what I have discovered over the years, that it's just extraordinarily complicated. So yesterday, and it's the synchronicity of it is lovely. So, because what did we discuss yesterday in the intermediate course? Right thought. That's exactly where we are on yesterday and Saturday. Is right thought or right thinking, and so I wanted to share with you. Since Jane's not here, I can say this about her. But so she sat there. So I had suggested to her. I said, you talk about right thought, and then I'll talk about the concept of stopping thought. So she talked about it, and I got increasingly uncomfortable as she talked about it, I wouldn't say agitated, but a little uncomfortable. And at the end, and she did an excellent job. Jane always does a great job, and it was very good. It was very clear. And she was talking about, the thoughts where the Buddha describes, that there are really two categories of thought, really unskillful thoughts and skillful thoughts, or unwholesome and wholesome. I kind of like unskillful, but, the thoughts of ill will or cruelty or greed. What category would that go in? That would be unwholesome, just in case you didn't know it. Beverly, you did know that, didn't you? And then skillful thoughts would be thoughts of benevolence, renunciation, certainly, like metta. So she did a great job, but I was uncomfortable. And so at the end of it, after we finished the class yesterday, she said, now, she said, I want you to always be honest with me about, give me feedback about how I'm doing. And I said, I said, you know me. I said, I always do that, and this is not on again.
We can hear you.
I think maybe it could be the battery. It could be the battery in this. In fact, I bet it is.
The light on this turned off again.
But we hear you okay.
Yeah.
It's really for the video,
Oh, I
because for the YouTube, it's like, it's a huge difference, That microphone doesn't pick up very well. Well, it's not plugged in.
I guess this must have a battery in it.
I'm telling you. What?
It seems like this speaker has a battery in it. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
There we go.
Well, we live and learn. All right, so we have to start all over from the very beginning, okay? And so you can edit it up to this point. We'll start from right here. So as I was sitting, and I'm just kidding. Where was I?
Timbuktu.
Jane.
Jane was asking.
I
about
love
feedback.
doing that.
You were being honest.
So, so I told her, I said, I told Jane, I always am honest, give you my feedback. I mean, I was being kind of flippant, implying, that I'm perhaps too generous with my feedback. And criticism. And she said, no, you're not. She said, you don't much at all. So anyway, so I said to her, this was the discomfort. I said, the only thing that kind of made me uncomfortable is, I said, you talk about it as if it's just a breeze, right? Not that you intended to do that, but I said, I think that when you talk about right thought, you have to come from the awareness that it's the hardest thing in the world for a human being, because we are locked to an extent in our thought. We're stuck in our thought. And just even the idea of having a separation from that, right, which is a precious moment. And so Jane is, and she immediately said, she got it, of course, because it is true that I would never even attempt to talk about it separate from this awareness that it's the most difficult thing, I think, that we can do in our practice. It's just, really, it's just like I said. So I'm sitting in meditation and I'm thinking about what am I going to say. The thought is about right thought. It's absurd. It's absurd. And it was really interesting watching, so there's like a bright thing. Oh, God, this is a very smart thing to say, right? Or, oh, this is, and really I had really like just little things, little blossoms of interesting things to say about it. And more or less, I let it go. So I guess I wanted to say that to you just right before we get into it, that I think that if you don't approach it with this extraordinary amount of humility, you're dismissing it entirely. Because really, what are you beyond your thought? Who are you beyond your thought? I'm not saying you're not anybody beyond your thought. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But we are, from the moment we are awake, right, we're thinking, aren't we? We're thinking. And the moments of not thinking are precious, God knows. The moments of what the Tibetans call rest. So I just wanted to say that. I don't know that I've ever said it that strongly before, that, as, the famous, I think, therefore I am, which one famous monk says is a tautology, meaning that it's, we think, therefore we are. We think, that's it. Who are you beyond a thought? Who are you beyond?
Mm-hmm.
Who are you beyond the constantly thinking? Maybe that's really what this practice is about. Is that if you strip away, if you gain the ability to have those moments, those spaces between, those gaps between thought, maybe we begin to know who we are. I don't know. So. I wanted to go back and say, just to kind of repeat a little thing that I said, just a little bit of what yesterday, that to a degree, what you think is telling you and telling me is what our level of understanding, the the Buddha's teaching is unbelievably brilliant. I mean, he began everything with right understanding. The Eightfold Path begins with right understanding, and what I think comes directly from my level of understanding. So obviously, if I think that it's possible to chase after pleasure for the rest of my life, and that I'm going to find it and be happy forever, that's wrong understanding, isn't it? That's wrong understanding. But if I have that wrong understanding, I am going to be doing that. I'm going to be constantly, a new car will make me happy, or a new house will make me happy, or a new lover will make me happy, or my little boy being happy will make me happy. I mean, it's all, something that will be permanent, will last forever, that will give me pleasure, will make me happy. That's an example of wrong understanding according to the Buddha, the first limb. But the other thing is, in other words, you and I will have wrong thought if our understanding is wrong. So that's kind of the brilliance. I mean, and it's like that is kind of an exception as far as I know. I don't know any other tradition that teaches that. That really, you can't skip your understanding. Right? You can't work with your thought if you have wrong understanding, because it just ain't going to work. You have to, so again, right understanding is that craving and clinging creates suffering. That's right understanding. So then if I have thoughts of craving, I can understand that those are wrong thoughts, right? I can see that they're unskillful thoughts because I know that they will cause me to suffer. And if I don't know that they'll cause me to suffer, why will I quit thinking them, right? Why would so why would I stop? So I said this in the first intermediate course that we had in the spring, and I just continue to like it. The Buddha talked about sort of like, I don't know if I think he literally said like baskets, but maybe he didn't. But he says like, so you look for the unskillful thoughts of ill will. So you put that in your basket, and then here's the thought of greed, and you put that in a basket. You categorize your thoughts. So when we were working, and we probably do it this time too, but we were working on that in the intermediate course last time. And I was suggesting to people that if you do start becoming extremely interested in just watching your thoughts, one of the things that you'll start noticing is that everybody in this room is going to have like one main basket. You are. You're going to have one basket that's going to be filled with most, But I mean, it depends on how interesting you are. I mean, really, I don't know if I'm making a joke or not. I don't think I'm very interesting because my basket is Long Beach meditation. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. How are we doing money-wise? Do we have enough money? Can we afford this? Should we do, what's the next program we should have? How's Travis doing? How's the board doing? It's amazing. It's kind of sad. I mean, really, because it's like it isn't as if that really is doing anybody any good, including me. And before that, I'm sure that, I had another major basket. But that would be my number one basket. And what's your number one basket? What's the thing you think the most during the day? Because everybody in this room is going to have one thing that you think the most. I swear. It could be, oh my God, I am really, it's like talking about worried about your health. Oh, I don't know how long I'm going to last. I mean, I've got this. And I mean, it could be thoughts about, your physical health. That would be, or it could be worry about your money. Oh, what am I going to do when I retire? I've gotten a couple of emails about that lately from people worried about it. Well, I have, about, how they're going to survive after they retire. But, I mean, in terms of having enough money. But, so I don't know. What is do you worry about Owen? Is that your number one thought? You don't have to share that. But, but if you don't, Krishnamurti said, I think, what?
I
I said he's fine.
Oh, he is fine.
I probably got an LBM basket going too. Yeah.
That LBM basket's a pisser.
And thank you for that.
I'm really serious. I'm inviting you to be so interested in your thoughts as a template that tells you something extraordinary about yourself, if you're willing to do it. Some people have anxious thoughts. I know people who, their thoughts are just sort of like a kind of an anxiety that goes. Other people have like worried thoughts, which is not necessarily the same thing. I have like one little basket called ill will. Does anybody have a basket called ill will? I got an email from someone this morning, and it went right into it went in that basket in a nanosecond. I remembered something that they had, done somewhat unkindly to me, and I realized, oh my God, it was like 3 months ago. It was 3 months ago, and I thought, I don't know. So that would be, to some extent, I'm kind of like being a little bit more psychological, but I'll say, I'll say that in a second. But this is partly what the Buddha said about working with thought, categorize them, right, and to see what is thoughts of ill will or thoughts that are unskillful and thoughts that are skillful. So, and in that vein, he would say that you really need to be aware of skillful thoughts. I don't think we do that either, do we? I mean, do you walk around just noticing that you're feeling loving kindness? Not likely. Why is that? Right? I mean, certainly it's kind of easy to be somewhat aware when you want to kill somebody. People like the VA, right? But so in other words, again, if you were really noticing your thoughts and reading them, as Krishnamurti says, you would actually be aware of thoughts of loving kindness, you'd be thoughts of generosity, you'd be thoughts of whatever, as well as the unskillful thoughts. So, and I said this about 2 weeks ago, if you remember, if you really are interested in deeply going into the to what we would call working with thought, I suppose. I think that the master of that is Krishnamurti. I don't think there's. I've read a hell of a lot in the past 40 years, but he was that was his focus, was thinking, thought. He said you have to read it like you're reading a paragraph, right? You need to read it, and he said you have to read it to the end of the sentence, right? Now, we tend to, like, if you have a thought, you don't like that thought, we'll get rid of it very quickly, right? Really, we'll put it right out of our mind. But he said you have to read it all the way to the end of the sentence, really, you stay with it rather than trying to get rid of it. And it is a fascinating thing. We think that we can't stop our thought, but we can stop a bad thought in a nanosecond if we don't like it. And so we actually can stop thought. When it's the psychological term would be ego dystonic, when it goes against what the ego wants. I mean, if the ego's happy thinking bad thoughts, that's fine, right? But sometimes it could be like a reflection back that it doesn't like. So So one of the ways that you start, that's a kind of like a very basic way that you start working with thoughts, is that you try to become interested in them enough to just sort of like, and David said this, and it's really in your email, and it's really a brilliant thing. You say, what am I thinking? So you're standing at the library behind the counter, right? You ain't got anything else to do, right? And so it wouldn't hurt to suddenly say, what am I thinking? Cindy, the truth is, you'll discover that you're thinking something. You'll be very surprised. The odds are, if you're standing behind the desk, right, you're thinking something. We're always thinking. It's ridiculous. And if you stop and say, well, what am I thinking? Very often that can, number one, that can help you to see what you're thinking. But number two, sometimes it can help you to really then just sort of slow down. So number one, I guess, or I've said number one already too many times. You begin with this trying to cultivate an interest in thought. And I would suggest that there are a lot of things that the ego resists. That's number one. That's a biggie. It has no interest in looking at thought. Now, I wonder why that is. Why is it that your ego or my ego doesn't want to look at thought? It's the way it lives. It survives through thought. The one thing that will kill the ego is to stop thinking. So, how many people are interested in stopping thinking? We sit on our cushion, yeah. We sit on the cushion, and like we want to kind of like, everybody wants peace. Does anybody want? Everybody wants a little peace. Everyone wants a little tranquility, right? That's nice. But how many people want to sit, and kill the ego in the sense of not thinking? And really, it is the non-violent, this whole idea of, the idea that you've got to kill the ego, which is nothing. That is actually a violent idea, and it's a stupid idea too. You can't kill nothing. This is like trying to walk in the room and kill empty space, right? I'm going to kill this space in here. Did you ever try to do that, right? Take a chair and throw it from one end to the other and say you're going to try to kill space. You wouldn't pull it off because you can't kill space. That's the same thing as you can't kill the ego because the ego is space. But you can give it a hard time by letting go of thinking, because that's the way it keeps going. To some extent, that's the way, my ego right this minute is going, keeping it going by thinking and talking to you all. All right, so now I think I'm going to get to, So I want to just get to these, so I said in the beginning that, and this is like, again, so some humility has to come in, because if you don't understand the idea of seeing through thought, one way to approach it is, I'm not ready to see that yet, rather than, what am I doing wrong, right? Or I've got to read a book, or I've got to understand, because it is absolutely a something that just simply happens as a result of your process of becoming more and more transparent. So I wrote this, I didn't write it, but it's in this book. Jane read something from this book yesterday, and I thought, and we sold one. Every time she reads something, somebody buys a book. So you all have heard all of this ad nauseam. You've heard, well, everyone's heard this, or you read it, but we'll go through it one more time. So this is a very wonderful story about the 10th century in China. So in the old days, this is written by Da Hui, and he says, in the old days, Kuei Shan asked Lazy An, isn't that a name? Lazy An, A-N, Lazy An, that was his name. And I wonder if it's like a translation where he really was considered lazy. I don't know, but that was his name. Lazy An. So he said, Lazy An, what do you do 24 hours a day, buddy? And so Lazy An said, well, I tend the ox. I tend my ox 24 hours a day. So Kuei Shan said, well, how do you tend it? And he said, whenever it gets into the grass, I pull it back.
by the nose. You know, they had a ring, an oxen, they have a big ring in their nose. And so then Quaishon said, you are really tending your ox. So this is like, in a sense, what the Buddha was talking about, taking everything and putting it in baskets. What was that? What was funny about that?
I don't know.
Oh, it's just funny.
You are really tending your ox.
You're really tending your ox. So well, I don't know if I want to go there or not. So, you know, there's a famous, the 10 ox herding pictures in Zen, right? So the ox pretty much is the metaphor for the mind in the Chan Buddhism and in Zen. And then the ox herding pictures are quite wonderful. So in a sense, he's talking, that really would be what we would call the cognitive behavioral method of working with thought. And he really, tending the ox, to some extent, so like what he means is when it gets off in the grass, right? If he's got this ox, right, and he looks over, he's not minding, the guy's not minding his own business. He looks over and the ox is down in the rice paddy, okay? So he goes down there and grabs it back. That would be the same as having an unskillful thought and grabbing that thought by the nose and pulling it back on the path, right? That's a very what I would call a cognitive behavioral approach to working with thought. And interestingly enough, when I went to a seminar many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, with Robert Burns, who's a very famous cognitive behavioral, he wrote the Feeling Good book. He had just at that point started getting interested in Buddha, in the Buddha's teaching, because as I said in this, I think that Buddha was the first cognitive behavioral therapist, and perhaps the greatest of all time. He is, you know, and hello, right thought, right? I mean, he puts that number 2 after right understanding. If that's not a great cognitive behavioral therapist, I don't know. So, and he was saying, you know, to some extent, you are what you think. That's exactly what cognitive behavioral therapists say. You are what you think. If you can change your thought, you'll be okay. It's kind of sad that cognitive behavioral therapists, including, don't also say, and it's well nigh impossible to do. Right? We go to a therapist and sit there for 50 minutes and we got to change black and white thinking or catastrophic thinking, minimizing, maximizing. Oh yeah, and you do your little workshop and you go home and workbook and you go home. But the truth is, it's almost impossible to do it because we think all the time, right? We think all the time. So therefore, to interface with that problem, you would have to be working with it all the time, right? It's like, in other words, so we think all the time. The ox gets off in the rice paddy constantly, right, 24/7, and so then we work with it for like 30 minutes a week. Not going to happen. It ain't going to happen. And that's why I say, again, if you don't approach this with the profundity of the problem, I mean, the problem is we think all the time. We think all the time, right? And mostly it's just not skillful thought. I mean, I could tell you, I mean, it certainly is not, I'm not skillful. So I wanted to say, so to move on to what David was interested in. First thing I wanted to say is, you do that, that's the beginning of the practice of working with thought. Is that you see that you look at that ox, and you know, or that thought, and you know, and you pull it back, or you nurture it, right? I mean, if it's a good thought, you nurture it. That's what I call that. I would call that a cognitive. That's the cognitive behavioral thought in psychology. Change your thought, and you change your person. Well, you don't really change the person by changing the thought, and that's the problem. There's a very famous meditation person who has many wonderful things on the YouTube, and this person talks about looking at a thought and saying, is it true? And I don't want to say who this person is, but they'll say, is it true? Is that thought really true? And they will really show you how when you really look at it, you can see it's not really true, right? I mean, you'll see the falsity of it. But the next step of, so to some extent, that would be skillful or skillful to some extent. But the next level is where you get the ability to watch the thought running through your mind as just the thoughts running through your mind, right? It's not like you're saying this is a good thought or this is a bad thought. You're just watching the show, okay? So that is to some extent what I was doing during the sit, right? I mean, I know that I'm going to talk about right thought, right? And so then I'm watching the thoughts coming up. We'll talk about this. We'll talk about that. It was kind of funny, and I didn't get into them. I didn't, like what I call it, I didn't eat them. I didn't chew them. You know, I was picking the strawberries and I just let them go because I wasn't interested in doing that. So, but it's very interesting. In other words, because I think the next level of working with thought is that you don't give them energy one way or the other. You just look at them, right? You just look at them. They're still thoughts and they're still kind of real. They still have some juice to them. But you're just sort of like, if your mind is is much more settled, and so that you're much more just in an observer mode, you just kind of like are watching them. But then the level that I wanted to describe to you all today is where the observer has become so still, and this would be called where the observer has become so silent inside that what is really then beginning to see is called prajna, 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 or in there it would be called pana, P-A-N. It's the same word. Sanskrit is prajna, Pali is pana. It means intuitive wisdom. Intuitive wisdom is not logical, rational thought. Okay? Logical, rational thought looks at David's thought and it says, this is unskillful, this is unskillful, or this is skillful. That's logical, rational, intelligent thought, right? Or it says, or it looks at the mind and it says, oh, the mind, these thoughts are just running. This is all they are. They just run and run and run, right? I mean, that's still logical and rational and thought. If the mind goes to a place where that it is still, like, again, the wonderful phrase, the beautiful phrase of Ajahn Chama, still far as a pool, then one is not seeing from an ego base, and one is seeing from what is called, again, is prajna. One then sees a thought as being empty. Just empty. There's nothing to it. It's not true and it's not false, right? I mean, because if you look at a thought and say that's a true thought, right, that's, what is it that says that's a true thought, right? That still is like the logical, that's still an ego-based intelligence. That's saying this is a skillful thought, this is an unskillful thought, blah, blah, blah. But the more profound way to see a thought is, as I said, and this is why it's so confusing, because it only comes from where the mind is unbelievably still. In other words, if there's no thought in the mind, if I see a thought and say that's a skillful thought, that's a thought that said that's a thought, right? It has to be a thought that says that's a skillful thought, or it's a thought that says that's an unskillful thought, or it's even a thought that says, oh, look at here, the mind's just running on, right? These are thoughts that are running around. That's what I was doing when I was sitting, right? It was still thought. But it's not a thought. If the mind is utterly still and silent, that's prajna. It ain't thinking. It's just knowing. Does that make sense? So in other words, it sees without, it doesn't need to think. It sees a thought as nothing. It's it's described as a bubble. But I mean, there's nothing to it. So in that sense, you would not need to say, oh, that's a skillful thought or that's an unskillful thought, because it just vanishes. It cannot. A thought cannot exist in the presence of prajna. It can't. Now, we're not trying to get rid of thought. We're not trying to destroy the thinking mind. That's not what this is about. It's about developing this capacity to not be lost and completely caught in thought, which most of us, well, all of us are to an extent. So I'm going to say that again. Thought cannot, if you want to call it awareness, that's okay with me too, by the way. But the real word is prajna. Prajna is just utter wisdom. It doesn't matter how wonderful the thought is or how bad the thought is, the most evil thought you ever had in your life, or, like this thought of, Jesus Christ thought, or the most loved. It doesn't matter. It cannot exist in the presence of prajna. It can't. Because it's simply, because prajna just sees it as it's like a movie. The only way you can make a movie work is to believe it. You can't go to a movie and enjoy it if you know it's a movie. It's not possible, is it? You sit there and, right? It's not possible. So you go to any great movie, right? And you say, well, this is just a movie. Then this is just frame. It destroys it. That's what a thought is. In some ways, the same thing. It's something that it's an energy that is coming up from the mind. Patanjali calls it a fluctuation in the brain. It's in the brain waves, right? That's all it is, right? So what would it look like? What would a thought look like? Any thought you have, I love my dog, I love my husband, I love my wife, I love my child, I love me. Any thought that you have, what would it look like if you could see it on a graph? Right? What would a thought look like if if it's not in your head, right? But if you could see it on a machine, right? Just be like a wave. So to see it that way now, and by the way, I don't see it that way. If I said, I have seen it that way many, many times, but like on a 1-month retreat. And it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. So really you're just like, it takes your breath away. Because suddenly because we're so used to believing everything that's in our head. It doesn't matter how ridiculous it is. You could have the most ridiculous, but we still, but we're so used to believing everything that comes through. We believe it. It's a movie. But when you're sitting there and suddenly you see that it's nothing at all, but just some energy that's, coming up from the brain's firing, it's extraordinary because it's like utterly, it's an utter freedom. It's a totally, that's a being awake. So it's like I said, I can't sit here and brag and say, I do that a lot, because I don't. More than often, I'm that level down from that. I'm not so much that bottom level, right? But I'm sort of like, mine will be more like in the middle level of just watching the show, and just, right? I checked, we have a blog. I decided we need a blog, and so I pestered poor little Andrew, God bless him. I pestered him until he built a beautiful blog for us, right? Well, so I thought, I've not looked at it in 3 months. I thought, well, look at that. So this morning I found it, right, and there were like 348 comments on it, and some of them were in Chinese, some were in Japanese, and also it's like, and they don't have anything to do with it. Like some of them are like selling tennis shoes and handbags, and I looked at that, and I thought, how stupid can you be, Victor? And I had this wonderful, it was a delicious moment. I laughed out loud, right? Because that I could have enough time to do a blog. So, that was a thought, and it was a thought that gave me a lot of pleasure. And really lightened up my morning a lot. I laughed at me. It was just great. I thought, the idea that I can do a blog, I can barely get here and do a Dharma talk. But, really, it's true. And I thought, who do you think you are? It was just lovely. But as I said, mostly I live in the middle world of that, just watching the thoughts and kind of like enjoying, kind of thinking they're funny. and not getting terribly lost in them, but I do get lost in them. But the higher level, that only comes from when your mind is completely still. If your mind is still and silent and there's no thought in it, you see truth. Whatever that is. I'm not telling you, you see reality. You see truth. And the extraordinary thing is, every human being, we have that capacity. It's astounding. We have that amazing ability. All we have to do is to let go of this thinking, discursive, common, endlessly commenting mind. How am I doing? What am I doing? So that's the best I can do. I guess just to put a cap on it, it's really funny because it's really not very rare that you read this, by the way. The idea of seeing through a thought. People don't talk about it very much. I don't know why. But it's a very, very big deal, David. To see through a thought is like something like you can tell your friends about for the next 5 weeks. I saw through a thought. I'm really serious. If you do it, it's a very big deal, right? You say, oh my God, because it takes your breath away. Okay? That's it. Go home, sin no more. Be happy.